All right, well, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. My name is Rob. I'm with the Huntington Learning Center, and we wanted to come over here to the Orion Township Library to talk about avoiding the summer slide, because the one thing that we do know is that students over the summer months can lose up to about a month worth of school in those 3 months of time. So what we want to do is just have a chance to sit down, kind of go through some strategies parents can use to be ready to help keep that learning up during that summertime. Get through that. Kind of like in short, when we talk about the benefits of summer learning, one thing that we have to remember is that this is a risk-free time to explore. There's no risk of a grade, there's no teacher judgment, there are no peers who might say something about what you're learning. And risk-free is really, I think, an important part of the learning process, feeling that you have a freedom to make a mistake. If the worst case happens, you throw the project out. It also gives us a good opportunity to do that learning by doing. So getting your hands dirty with it, see it for yourself. You're not just reading it in a book. So we want to make sure that there are opportunities for students to do that exploring and seeing where they can go with things. Take one slick adjustment over there. So I can see, yeah, that's a little easier than turning around. So we talk about that summer slide. There are a couple of things we see with it. One being obviously the academic loss, but we also want to be mindful of losing some of that routine that goes with going to school every day. So it's that sense of, do I need to be in bed because I have to be up, because I have to be ready? And so you can see there too, there's some statistics that relate to test scores given at the end of the summer. Summer learning loss accounts for about 2/3 of the difference between a college path in high school and not. And so that's the kind of thing where there's the evidence that says the more we keep our kids engaged in that summer period, the more likely they are to feel confident to take on rigor. That learning is a natural part of life. And so as we go through these strategies, I like to focus on helping kids have that attitude that learning is not a thing you just do at school because the teacher told you you have to learn. It's just part of life. And it's that lifelong learner that will go on to push themselves in the harder courses and be on a different path. Math skills. Math is a weird subject because math is much more skill-based. I think, especially through elementary, of what do you do? What do you do? And like any other skill, if you don't practice it, you lose it. So I'm sure somewhere there's a wonderful elderly piano teacher that would remind me I could be playing concertos right now, but I did not practice it. And now I'm lucky if I can do 2 hands of the piano man and it's not pretty. So it's a skill we have to practice to keep up. So that's what the summer slide is. The Huntington method is a pretty straightforward program. This is what we use in our learning center. And I'm only bringing it here because I think it works really well as a teacher. I didn't mention at the beginning, I am a retired educator. I taught 25 years at Walled Lake Central High School. And I'm very proud to have been a Viking for that time. And this is, I think, a solid strategy where you start off by saying, what do we need? What's our goal? Let's learn stuff. And then once we've learned it, check to see if we need to revise our goal. So this is what we do in center with students, but we can do the same thing with our kids over the summer. What do we want to accomplish? Let's go after it and then reassess as we need. So we're going to kind of go through those a little more in depth. How do you know what your student needs? And there are a lot of different strategies. If you have a student, as you mentioned, a first grader, there will be a report card, and most school districts now, the elementary report cards are very, very detailed. You get a lot of data about beginner, secure, not secure, and so you can use that as a judge. Is this something that we need to practice more of? Can we build from it? Especially at the elementary ages, conversations with the teachers are good too. They're usually very happy to have that conversation with you, especially if you don't wait till the last day. But that chance to say, what are 3 things we can work on over the summer? And they can hook you up with that. The kids, depending on the child, can be also very insightful. My own daughter tends to be pretty upfront with the fact that her math skills are not where she is comfortable with them. And she's willing to say, I need to do more math. I need to work on this skill. And then formal assessment tests are another tool, especially as they get older, where you can start to look at different placement tests that you can kind of casually do at home even, using the internet, just to get a sense, where are we at, what do we need to practice, and kind of build that sense for what are the needs. Once you got your needs, you gotta set some goals. And there are really no bad goals. You don't have to focus entirely on an academic piece. Sometimes a goal is simple as taking a walk in the park. For some families, that's a goal that you have to actually set and go after. Similarly, feeling confident about going back to school, being comfortable talking to adults. These are all good things to help them develop. And it's okay if part of that summer learning is having the conversations about what can we do this week to meet this goal where you're going to be a little more comfortable talking to an adult. What can we do to that end? Generally, presentation like this is more geared around the academic stuff. So you could say, what are some goals we're going to go after as far as reading? Are we going to master, can we do fractions by the end of the month would be a goal. Or how many vocabulary words can we get? When we talk about goals, I don't know how much you all have seen the SMART goal, but it's a very standard mnemonic. And I do it a lot with my own kids when we talk about what are we trying to do here. And in particular, it's the measurable and achievable are the two biggest parts of the SMART goal I always like to focus on. How do we know we've hit it? That's the measurable piece. What are we measuring? And is this a realistic goal? Are we sure we can keep this up? I'll pick on my teenager a bit because sometimes the goal of I will be up and dressed every day by noon, that is not achievable when you're 15 and it's summer vacation and you're a pandemic kid. That just, no. We could say it. It's not happening. Timely is another good one to remember too, because you want to have a sense for when you're going to stop and assess the goal. And so even breaking things down by the week, by the month, looking at this from a standpoint of spreading things out with time so that you can use that as a judge to go after the other pieces of the SMART goal. And you chuckled, you've seen SMART goals.
I use them often with my students.
Yep. It's tried and true. You can't really go wrong with them. So that would be that goal piece. And then from there comes, this is really the bulk of what we're going to talk about, is these learning opportunities. So this slide is really just a quick glance across the top of different places you could turn to get information. Not everyone is in a position where they can go after all of these. I like that point on there of using family as a place to get information, because I do think that's an untapped resource in many families. And in this day and age, if grandpa's on Facebook, it's only a few steps to make a Facebook phone call, and you can get a lot of information. And I will freely admit some regret to not spending more time collecting stories from my own grandfather, who himself was a depression kid. And so those opportunities to hear those stories and to document that and learn history that way. I did hear some history, most of it involving the Prohibition era, where the family was involved in perhaps ways I should not admit on film. I will not comment beyond the fact that there was a still at one point, and my great-grandfather did disappear under mysterious circumstances during the Prohibition era. That's all I will admit, and actually about all I know. So yeah, there are some stories there and some history. And I think that adds another layer. The more personal something is, the more likely you are to learn it. In fact, there was a study in the 80s that said if you told a student that the origin of a vocabulary word matched their national heritage, they were more likely to invest in learning the word. It didn't have to be true, but if you just told them that, you made that personal connection, and now they have an vested interest in learning the word because it's part of that heritage. Not that I would advocate lying to kids, but it's a good data point to support. The more personal the learning, the stronger it is. And that kind of ties back to these opportunities. So once we've got a chance to do that, we should also remember this one. What do you get when you work hard? Standard reward? More work. And I like the idea of taking a moment here to mention that, is that when we're setting these goals, the one thing we also want to avoid is that idea that, congratulations, you mastered 40 vocab words and we're only at the 4th of July. Let's go for 80 before August. And we want to make sure that this whole process still, because it is summer, we are fighting against this idea that summer vacation is free time. we also want to keep our kids involved in it. We don't want them to get to 4th of July weekend and overhear them at the picnic complain about how much they hate summer vacation because mom and dad are making me do all this extra work. So we want to kind of keep that in mind, is making sure that as we set our goals, we're pacing them out neatly and smoothly to keep the kids on it. Then we reassess. How did we do? Did we hit the goal we set? We said by 4th of July week, we wanted to have this many vocab words. Did we get them? And when we set the goal, make sure we have a way of measuring. Are we using flashcards? Are we using an app? If we're using Duolingo, that's a nice one because you can check immediately. How did you do on it? So you want to see. Duolingo is a language learning app. So the way it works is you log in, and every day it will give you a certain number of word challenges. So it gives you intro vocabulary, and then it starts working with you on grammar, and it's meant to kind of keep you doing about 15 to 20 minutes of your new language every single day. And you get a reward for having logged in for a certain number of days in a row. You get a streak.
Is it free?
It is free up to a point. I believe it's free for your first language. So I think you can do one language at a time for free. I will have to I would double check that, but it's not expensive. I know my daughter has it. We don't pay for it. And she usually has a language she's learning. She's not great at keeping her streak. I do have a couple of friends that are on it. I think one has something like a 500-day streak on Latin, where she's learning it, where that's just, she wants to master it. And she will, part of it too, she wants to be able to read certain church writings in the original. She doesn't trust translations. So she wants to actually get the original Latin in front of her and then parse it, which I really respect, because that takes it to a new level. I started it with Irish, and I will freely admit I have not been good. I know enough to recognize certain articles. That's where you start. That's where you start. I would also mention routine. I haven't started because it's on the next slide. And then, of course, do we want to change our goals? The neat thing with the SMART goal is you're always coming back to it in a timely way and saying, how are we doing? Do we need to make some changes? So maybe we said we were going to do 40 math flashcards every week, and, well, we only did 30. Well, okay, maybe we should make our goal 30. And then we can stick with that goal for the next several weeks. But it's that reassessment that dynamicy, so you don't find yourself in July with someone who's upset because you said you were going to do this, you said you would do this, now we have to. It's that reassessment. Do we need to adjust? And adjust either way. Maybe the goal was too easy. Maybe they were like, oh yeah, I really don't think about my flashcards because I just get it done. It's like, well, can you do more, you think? And then you can dial it up. I taught under 4 principals when I was at Walled Lake Central. I'm not naming names. I will say that one of them was the greatest boss I have ever worked with. I mean, bar none. The best guy you could work for. Almost always had your back. And if he didn't have your back, he was one to look you in the eye and say, here's why I don't have your back. This is not from that guy. But I did work for a principal. That was one of his mantras. Do routine things routinely. And I think it's very easy when we get into planning our summers and our time with our kids to lose out on the power of that routine. Especially when it comes to learning opportunities. If you were to say, we're going to do our vocab words every morning. Get up, do your breakfast, do your vocab flashcards, text mom how you did. That way you know every day at 8 o'clock there should be a ding on the phone. Dad, I did my flashcards, I got 6 right. Daily walks in the park is a good example. We're going to do it every day. We're going to make sure we do it every single day. Bedtime's another good one. You kind of know, especially with it still being light at bedtime for the little ones, that sense of like we are going to all sit as a family and read for 30 minutes, starting at 9 o'clock, and then we're all going to bed. Gets that sense of momentum that will help maintain that routine that they had during the school year, so that summer does not become a free-for-all. And that's what I think we want to try to avoid. I would also point out that a lot can be accomplished with that routine. The June of the pandemic, so before we could all really be around everybody else, I had my one and only century month where I walked 100 miles in a single 30-day period. And it came down to just telling myself every day I need to walk 3 and some mile, 3 plus a half mile. And I had my route, and every day I get my lesson plans out to my students. I grade my papers. About 11 o'clock, I'd put on my headphones. I'd go walk for about an hour. I'd come back and I'd grade more papers. And you do that a little bit every day, and it added up. Took a few days off here, took a few days I had to walk a little extra, but you can do it. You can do big things when you break into chunks and you put it on a routine. So let's start talking about actual skill building. Books, reading is obviously a big skill we want our kids to have. The key now is picking out what to read. And this is one where I will almost always defer to an expert. So being someone that's recognized here at the library, that's a great step, because they can start to get to know you, the family, the kids, and make good recommendations. As we break these down, I would also point out they a fact book is actually, I never thought much about reading fact books until my kids did. And these are like the top 10 lists, because they have that sense of, I want to know this. And because it's categorized, it's a little easier to understand. And then we have that personal investment in it. Nonfiction is also a very popular one to point kids at, but I would actually, I think the true to life stories tend to be a little better, because I think because an author has taken over the narrative, it's historically inspired. They learn about the period, but because you have a hand guiding the narrative oftentimes is a little more engaging. Not to say that there aren't some amazing nonfictions. Fantasy and paranormal are also on the rise again. The Dungeons and Dragons movie has helped elevate what once was just something nerds did to something everyone at least recognizes. And that is its own thing we can talk about in a second. Other publications, I did chuckle. I had to make some edits from the original because they had Boys Life as a recommended magazine for kids. One small problem with that is it's no longer called Boys Life and hasn't been for a couple of years. I had to fix that one. Graphic novels, manga, and anime are also very big with the kids. You will have to learn with the anime that they read it backwards. So instead of opening the book and reading this way, they actually flip the book this way and open it and then work right to left across the page. It's an adjustment. But they do a fairly good job of providing good translations, so it's all in English. And kids have a stronger sense of accomplishment because they're not reading as many words to get the story, because they're just reading the dialogue. And so they can feel like they've burned through a lot more books in a short period of time, and they get that sense of accomplishment. And I'll talk a second about how to leverage that. The Lorelei method, that's one, not many people have heard of that, but I like it. There was an episode of Gilmore Girls, please don't judge, where Lorelei Gilmore's daughter starts college, and they're trying to figure out where to get their pizza from, where to get their coffee from, where to hang out, what Chinese place to order from. And so they sit down every night that she starts school, and they order from everywhere. So in one night, they bring in 12 pizzas, and they just sample. And the next morning, they go out and everyone brings in coffee from every coffee shop within a few minutes of the apartment. And they sample all of them. And so I call that the Lorelei method. Just kind of go crazy at the beginning and then pare it down once you see what they like. So for example, with the books, come up to the library, fill a bag, see what they've touched, and do okay, are you ever going to read this? Okay, we'll take that one back. Just to see what sticks. And get a sense for where you want to go with that. With the online stuff, obviously you want to know your kids, know what they're safe exploring, what they're not. As they get older, Wikipedia has some really fun activities you can adopt. The one I used to challenge my students with was something like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I would give them 2 random topics and say, okay, using Wikipedia links, connect these 2 ideas. Go. And they had to do it in the fewest clicks possible. And then we had to, as a class, put up on the overhead and map our way through it. So they had to actually recount it and take notes. But you get lots of fun little snippets along the way. And so you have a lot of opportunities for students and because they're designing their own path. And it's a competition, you get a lot of good feed in for that. Okay, so this is starting to get into how to leverage that reading. I I am not a great role model myself. I really don't touch books very often. I consume other media. Praise, so I'll freely admit I dropped that ball. Praise and encourage is good. The opportunities is one that you obviously, anyone can do that. It's about having that time to say, that was a good time to read, what do you think? Or get them up here to the library, see what they like. The participate before and after reading, I think, is the key, especially if they're using graphic novels, if they're using other literature, because this is where they go for the deeper understanding. So asking them to summarize the book they just read over dinner, or maybe even leverage a bit of, before we go get ice cream, tell me 3 things we can talk about from your book while we have our ice cream. And then you've got some bullet points. So when you sit down at Menchie's, you can say, okay, you told me 3 things. Tell me more about why she got to be a better reader, or why she was a better sports player, or what did her friend do that was so important? Because really, it's that piece of discussing it that becomes one of the most important skills they get from the reading. So it's not so much can they power through a text, but can they take the text and contextualize it for somebody else? Exactly, the summary piece. With a lot of the students we work with, one of the books we work out of is called Getting the Main Idea. And it really is just exercises in reading a paragraph and telling someone what the main idea of the paragraph was. For a lot of kids, especially up through 6th grade, that's still a challenge. And you can do that with literature they read for fun, because you can still get them to engage with you in it. And the more you know about that literature, the more you can ask them the probing questions. How do you think this character is different than you? How do you think they're like you? How would you have acted if that had happened? Do you think a good person does that? And you have a lot of neat conversations. The preview and predict is another skill of when they get their book or their literature, whatever they're using, reading the jacket together and having a good conversation about what they think is going to be in here. What characters are going to be important, what themes might be important. Get them thinking. If you're really good, get them to journal so that when they've read it, they can go back and go, how did I do? Were my predictions accurate? What made my predictions accurate? And if not, what did I miss? What were the surprises? Because that's another skill that we teach when we teach reading, especially in the upper elementary, is the idea of, I'm going to assign you a chapter on the War of 1812. Here's a little blurb about it. What do you think is going to be in here? And even if the kids don't say, oh, I think this is going to be about America's expansion, whatever they come up with is still something. And we can build on that prior knowledge. And almost all learning starts with that. So that's another thing you can build on. We talked about asking questions. Another fun thing is to take these reading opportunities and build into sketching and drawing and art. So a student might read a simple anime book and then ask them to make a picture of something important that happened as a project for the day. Especially if it's in a situation where they're going to have some downtime. Hey, before I get home from work, do you think you could make this for me? It gives them a nice clear goal, it sets a timeline on it, and it engages them with what they read. They might even have to go back and reread something to pull that idea forward before they put it into their picture for you. So it's another engagement tool. Because the important thing is we want them thinking about what they read. And you'll see this, I've seen this a lot with my own at the elementary level. This is a very common activity, is the idea of creating art from their readings. We talk about reading problems. This is the language we use in education for it. And there are different layers to it, especially at the 1st grade level, the early elementary. Decoding is a big one. Sound the word out. And then because English is not actually a language, it's what happens when a dark shadow mugs all the other languages for their parts of speech and puts them together into one thing. Decoding is a challenge in English. Absolutely. Vocabulary then gets into what does the word mean, and then fluency is being able to use the word in the right context. And so being able to just have an understanding of where your kid is at to help guide them. And again, English is an incredibly challenging language. Decoding is really a big part of the early elementary ages. But vocabulary is something else that you can drill on. You can easily create a deck of cards of words that they've mastered. And so that becomes one where they can start to recognize the word. And sight words, especially for the early years, as much as it seems painful to say they just need to memorize, sight words are really a good gateway into the later learning. So there's nothing wrong with making that a focus. I'm a big believer as a math teacher of never letting someone say they should not memorize. Some things in life you just gotta memorize. There's no way around it. Math skills. I think this is one of the cheesier ones we have, because I know I would have hated my parents if they had ever said to me, we're going on a road trip. Let's do a lot of math while we're there. That said, the more often you can sneak practical math into operations, the better. My kids both have access to a cell phone, which means they always have access to a calculator. I'm a big fan of, hey, Dad's driving. Can you put these in your calculator and tell me what you get? And then comes the obvious question, well, what am I doing? Well, I'm trying to figure out how long it's going to take us to get there. Okay, and now suddenly I'm teaching a mini math lesson, but I've got them engaged. They talk about the idea of while you're shopping, you can always calculate calculate tips is another good one. If you eat out a lot, it's an opportunity to get them thinking about how to do decimals. If you want to invest in that. I advise against the last bullet point about gas stations. These are children. We do not want to horrify them. Do not do math at the gas station. They shouldn't be thinking about that. Just, yeah. That or get a good Kroger card and run that sucker up so that you can get the $1 off. Suddenly it's not so bad. Now games. This is a little bit of a nerd in me. Board games have had a real renaissance in the last 10 years. And most of these are for slightly older kids. These would be 4th grade up. And this is just a sampling of what is in the modern board game market. You'll notice Monopoly is not up there. Sorry is not up there. These are modern. So the rules can be a little intimidating at first. But there's a couple on there I would point at as board games that do things that are worth it with elementary age kids. Ticket to Ride, they actually have a junior version. It's a game where you collect cards of different colors, and then you put down a collection of trains to claim a route. And what that does is it gets them practicing their counting skills, and it really gets them doing planning skills, where they might have a card that says they need to make a train that connects Detroit to Los Angeles. It's on the map, so they need to start thinking, well, I need 5 greens, and I'm gonna need a couple of reds, and they start with that strategy. The children's version of Ticket to Ride is a smaller scale of the full game, but it's a really solid introductory game for kids. Pandemic, when they're a little bit older, is a phenomenal game. It's a co-op game of trying to manage an outbreak, but it involves conversations about science, it involves conversations about containments, it involves some biology conversations. I recommend it highly as a game. Santorini is a game a little bit like checkers, but you're building towers. So it's another good game of strategy and counting. And then for the adults / the older family, I will always recommend the last bullet point, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It's kind of like a murder mystery game. It's built like a choose your own adventure where at the end of the paragraph, it doesn't say pick from 3 choices. You're just told pick a place in London to go. And then you look up that location's number and you look in your book and then you read what's there. And the goal is to solve the mystery by following the right clues. But it's another phenomenal game. Everything up there I would recommend. The ones that are in black, I actually either own or have played extensively. You do generally aim more to the 4th grade up audience. So you've got a little bit of time, but they're good recommendations. I would also suggest if you think you're a board game family or you want to become one, going into a friendly local game store, tell them, hey, I've got 6 and a 5-year-old. I want to try some of these games I heard about where they're going to be a little more engaging. What do you recommend? And the neat thing about a local game store over Amazon is that they're happy to talk you through everything they have on the shelf. King Domino, for example, is very well known for the younger audience. It's a domino game. but it has different colors on it. It has a little bit different strategy of what you're trying to build. So it kind of builds on that concept. But all these are great. Writing skills. I touched base on that a little bit when we talked about reading, is to get them organized. It's also a good skill good activity to delegate to kids to help them practice the skills. You know, putting them in charge of creating a grocery list is a good opportunity to practice the writing, practice the organizing. Letters, emails, thank you notes, these are all good things, especially for the elementary age. Hey, grandma came and visited this weekend. I really want you to write her a thank you note. And your note should give them a clear goal, and then give them a time to complete it by. Because that gets them doing the thing. Because like any skill, they don't practice it, they lose it. As the kids get older, there's nothing to stop. There's nothing to stop a young person from writing a letter to persuade. My oldest, when they were 7, wrote a letter to a video game producer calling for them to publish the 3rd game in the Portal series. They have not. But he, at that age, wrote a very passionate, this is why the game is great, this is why I've loved playing it, this is what I would like to see in Portal 3, I look forward to playing it someday, and we sent it off in the mail. But it was a good activity. And then that last piece, we also know now, we're seeing more of the need for kids to have ways to express where they're at in the world. So the idea of journaling, using poetry, keeping a diary. On the one hand, it's keeping them writing, keeping them creating sentences, keeping them thinking about the idea of a dialogue. But in addition to that, it's also giving them a place to have an outlet. And it's an opportunity for you to sometimes come back and talk to them and say, hey, can you tell me a little bit what you were journaling last night? And invite them to have those conversations, to have that emotional check-in, to see that if they're doing okay or if they have a particular need. So that's another opportunity that you can tack into that they can build on. But again, the most important part is that they are doing something. And then it loops back to our goals. What's our goal for journaling? Do we want to write a journal entry every day? Do we want to write a journal entry every week? And then having a little bit of accountability. Are you keeping up with it? I don't need to read it, but did you put something in your journal last night? So they can build on that. Geography, this one's a tougher one to make exciting, I think, outside of if you do traveling. Every time I've thought about this particular slide, I find myself like, everything I think of to build into it just sounds like I'm giving my kid an assignment. That said, you can do some fun things with it. If you do, absolutely. A scavenger hunt would be a great activity if you want to. To me, unfortunately, it falls a little bit into that assignment thing. Hey, it would be really cool if you could find 3 cities that blah. And if your kid's like, on it, that's great. It has them doing the thing. It's all about, is that your kid? I can tell.
To create things, hide things, and then you get a present at the end.
That's good. The idea of hiding things around, and can you figure it all out? Tie a prize to it. Hey, you guys have till the end of the day, you can use Google Maps. You need to bring me the following. Go. There is some neat stuff too, tracking the life of your hero, I thought was a neat one along those lines. If they have somebody, and you have the time to sit, to have that conversation. Well, they were born here, they recorded music here, they did concerts here. I mean, let's be honest, we could probably cover most of the world in a very positive way if we just looked at Taylor Swift's last 12 months. I mean, she's been everywhere. So that by itself could be exciting. I also do think there's something kind of neat about, I think Google Maps are a great tool. There's also a website called GeoTracker, I think is what it is. And what it does is it just drops you somewhere on a Google Maps street view. And you have to figure out where you are by looking around. And you can move a certain number of times, which gets you a new picture, but every time you move, your score goes down a little bit. And so the key is to look for landmarks to help you identify where you might be, signs that might give you a hint about the language there, because it can be anywhere in the world. We were really excited. I did it as a break with my students last year, and we were really excited because we recognized Portuguese. And we're like, sweet, we got this. And And then we saw a sign for a city and we're like, sweet, we got this. And we typed it in, and no, it was a Brazilian city with the same name. We were off by about 3,000 miles, but I don't know, I don't call that a loss. We also know physical activity is good for kids. It's good for adults. We tend to be kind of not great ourselves at it. I've never planned a backyard Olympics, but if that's the thing your family can do, that's great. I'm a big walker. I like to get out and look at things. The idea of a scavenger hunt, go to the park. I want you to bring me 3 pictures on your digital camera of these items. We also know that the more physical a child is involved in learning, the more likely it is to be retained. So the idea of developing a dance or any kind of physical activity can help build on that. So you can start to get those extra layers. I think it's in a later slide, but I want to mention it here because I'm starting to lose track of where things fit. And that's the idea, especially at the younger elementaries, of imaginative play. And there's nothing wrong with combining the learning we've been doing with that imaginative play piece. So the idea of, back when we were kids, they get out of the house and go play in the backyard, but also encouraging, why don't you guys go in the backyard and play whatever book you've just read? So get them thinking about that piece while they're doing it, or engaging them with it. Hey, let's go in the backyard and play. Okay, what would we be doing if we were those characters from the book about Ellis Island you read? Well, can we make our play structure Ellis Island itself? Where might we be? So you can add the physical side, but you're still referencing back to that reading piece they did. And that one's sticking in my brain because this year's Battle of the Books in Clarkston included the novel The Orphan of Ellis Island. It was one of the books the kids were all invited to read as part of that. So that's why it sticks in my brain. But that idea, though, the more physical, the more likely it is to stick. Okay, screens. We can't talk about summer learning and not talk about screens. We have to do that. I tried really hard to find somebody to give me a number. That's what I wanted. How many hours can this kid be on a screen? And none of them would do it. This is the best I could come up with. American Academy Child of Adolescent Psychiatry, encourage healthy limits. The Mayo Clinic got us to one size fits all doesn't work well. Cool. Anti-screen is perfectly valid. It's a tool, you don't have to use it. I will say if you choose to, there are websites like Common Sense Media to give you a good feel for what you're getting in for. I was surprised, I put the Common Sense Media bullet point in here because it had some reviews of a video game I enjoyed, and I liked what they said about it. They said this is the age it's appropriate for, these are the ages it might not be, here's why it's appropriate, here's why it's not. And I really respected that, and they did the same thing with my daughter's favorite cartoon. Here's some things you just should know going in. We're not judging it, we're just telling you it's there. And after I looked at a bunch of articles, it said, oh, by the way, $3 a month to keep using this website. And so I was like, well, that's okay. Well, I'm not taking it out, it's a great tool. But you would pay for it. So as your kids get older, you get more involved in that. Those resources exist, and I would recommend it. I'm a big believer in, I'm not a big fan of saying what kids can and cannot get access to. I'm a big fan of giving parents tools. Just real talk. Here's what your kids are going to see when they play this game. Here's what your kids are going to see when they watch this TV show. And give them that access. Now that said, thank you. That was interesting. If you do choose to use screens, everything we talked about is still applicable. And so that idea of maybe they do watch a few episodes of Owl House. Well, now we have a basis for conversation. Why don't you write me a letter as though Luz was writing it to her mom? What if you drew me a picture of what you learned from that episode of Sesame Street? Let's watch this, let's watch the latest Disney release, and let's do something with it. So you can take all of these screen activities and pull them in to other good learning. In fact, calls to action can often come from something inspired by watching a product. There are a lot of good nature documentaries out there that sometimes are, especially the modern era, are pretty good about saying, here's what's going on with these. That might spur a child to say, I want to write a letter to a congressman and tell them that we should protect that animal. And in the modern age, that letter will get an answer back. And there is something kind of fun about, hey, you've got mail from Representative Slotkin. Look at that. It's on official letterhead from the United States Congress. Heck, I still get kind of geeked when I get stuff on official letterhead from Congress. A little bit nervous, but geeked. But it kind of builds to all of these. And the same thing with the vocabulary review. I will admit a lot of video games now have a lot of subtitles, a lot of text. And I do make my daughter read it. If she's playing a video game and any words appear on the screen, I won't make her read them because it's practice and it's an opportunity. So I personally, I don't judge. I just say if you're going to have screens over the summers, use them. Use it as a tool because this is a thing they're doing. Especially with the older kids, video games today all have a story. So you can leverage that piece with like a 6th or 7th grader of, I will let you play this game, but at the end of the week, I want you to write me an essay about it. Tell me who the main character was and are they a good person? Boom, that's the trade-off. I'll buy the game, you have to do a little bit of work with it. And sometimes they'll get to the end and go, no, they weren't. I don't want to play that game anymore. Or they'll say, they weren't a good person and I'm not happy that I'm entertained by it, but I am. And I understand they're a bad person. Okay, there we go. So it's a chance to have that piece. I put this in here too to mention, if you have a family that does screens and you've noticed that they're watching the same things over and over again, this is something that's become a bit more, it used to be we would binge a series and we'd be done with it. And what we've seen over the last few years are people binging a series and then re-binging it. And what we're finding, a lot of evidence that this is often tied to anxiety. Because if a series runs, say, 3 seasons, you'll probably remember most of the big ideas, but not all the fine details. So you still get entertained by reliving the fine details, but at least you know what the final ending is going to be. And I just mentioned this here because it's a thing I have seen in my house more. And originally I fought against it. I said, you cannot just keep rewatching the same series. And the more I studied it, the more I went, no, you can keep rewatching a series because I know that's one way you're coping with what's going on in the world. If that's what you need to do to feel comfortable at night, I respect it. So I wanted to include that here. I have had some brief conversations with a child psychologist. We haven't gone in great depth. I did get a confirmation of my theory, but we haven't been able to connect for a bigger conversation. Because I wanted to be able to actually put up a quote from her. That's why it's got so much dead space on it. And then lastly, organized summer programs. There's a ton of them out there. I've got a few places I'm going to reference specifically, but these are other tools available to you. So getting in touch with the library about their summer reading programs. Museums often will have things going on. Community centers, et cetera, et cetera. The Orion Parks and Rec has got a ton of programming available for families. And so these all become opportunities. And these can also become places to model. Yeah, we can keep that going because not a lot to say. The DIA, I know that my spouse was part of a chaperone to the trip there. The kids loved it. A lot of good information available. It's not too bad price-wise, and it is considered one of the better art museums in the Midwest, so it's a good stop. I also include the Henry Ford in here. Greenfield Village is a bit more lifting if you want them to learn. You actually have to have a plan. Yeah, I love it, but you have to have a plan. Otherwise, it's just looking at old stuff. So you have to plan to guide it a little bit. I've never done the factory tour, but I have done the museum over the years. There are, again, beautiful artifacts there, beautiful recreations. I'm a big believer too, if the Henry Ford was a good hit and you are positioned to do it, the Smithsonian is a must do at some point because it's like the Henry Ford, but bigger and the real things, which is also very exciting. But again, it's very straightforward. I mean, they're always open 9 to 5. So lots of opportunities there. The Detroit Zoo fits the same model. It's always open 9 to 5. There's like 3 days they're not open. I'm a big fan of the zoo in the sense of buying a membership if you think you're going to go more than twice. And also the nice thing once you get to that spot is you don't feel so obligated to do 6 hours there. You have a membership, you can go in the morning, You see 4 animals, you hit the playground, you head home. And you do that once a week, which then gets that routine going. The only downside for working families is that 5 o'clock close time, even on weeknights. You can't do we'll go after work. So you're stuck on the weekends or doing some flex hours to make it happen. The other thing to mention too is they do get you on the parking. Cranbrook Institute of Science is not terribly far from this area. It was a must-do when I was younger because I grew up in the Birmingham area, so that was our favorite. They do still have the planetarium. They still do the laser shows. The hours are a little more scattered, but they have had some really neat programs come through. And I think they're expecting some rare dinosaur fossils this summer. So that will be another good opportunity to explore. As something in our area to hit. I would be remiss not to talk about Huntington for a minute or two. We are a tutoring test prep center. We work with kids K-12, and we use the model I started with, the idea of we do an assessment to see where your student is at. We then prescribe a special individualized plan to them. We set some goals, and about every 14 hours of instruction, we go back and we say, how are we doing? Let's do another check, and we make changes. We do have summer programs, and then for the older kids, we also help them prep for the ACT and SAT. But that's kind of where a lot of this model came out of. And I had my choice of jobs when I retired from teaching, and I like the job I got. So it's a program I'm very proud to be part of. I'm happy to talk after the presentation if you have more questions about that. But again, I felt obligated I should at least mention who sponsored everything today and get it out there on the record. So.
The closest one to us is the one in Clarkston.
Yep.
Right off the Clarkston Road.
That's where I work now. So we have had students from Orion Township come down there because we are the closest.
It's literally a task and jump away. I think I'd probably look at maybe a service like that, depending on how they do on the PSAT or PACT.
You got some time if that's your thought. You got time.
Well, that's my brain.
Perfectly fair. I think, being honest, I can see us actually as a family taking advantage of it this summer and the employee discount just to help the kids get ready for September. But at this point, are there questions of things I didn't talk about?
Yeah, no, it's helpful. Even, again, I know it sounds like your expertise was high school math.
Mm-hmm.
However, my little guy, we tried to prepare kiddos, did a preschool, both of them did the Young Fives program, because my daughter was an October birthday. Christmas Eve baby. So
Yep.
what's funky now, though, Rob, is I have friends who their babies are in June, and they don't want them to be the youngest, so they have them start later. So I was at first worried my daughter would always be the oldest, and come to find out she really isn't in October. It's interesting to me how there's June, July, even people, I heard of one couple, their child was in April, but they didn't want them to be the youngest.
It's always tough. It's always tough. And you end up with the social questions. I started college at 17 technically because I was a September birthday. So I had 2 weeks before I even had turned 18. So half of my dorm mates were off to the bar and I was there going, well, I can't get in yet. And it's a challenge. The biggest things I look at is the balancing of academic readiness and the risk of academic boredom. With my oldest, they had moved through all of the content at their daycare. There was no more pre-K stuff really to do. They were doing kindergarten material. And it was like, we can spend a whole year with them just spinning wheels, or we can start them in. And my father-in-law insisted we not, because you don't play sports if you start as soon as you can. To which my sister retorted, he's not going to play sports because he's your kid. She's not wrong.
When is your son's birthday?
November. Okay. So that was when...
So why would you made him start before then?
We started early, yeah. So he'll be 17 when he starts college as well, and he'll have to go all the way till Thanksgiving before he's 18.
Your kiddos are probably the cutoff, though, is still December 1, right?
We got in right on the front end of that as they started to work it backwards.
Yeah. So now, at least, just for your knowledge, if you were unaware, that Lake Orion School District is very much a proponent of DK now. Developmental kindergarten.
Yep.
It was fall and even summer babies, where that was not a thing when I was little. So.
Well, and again, it's all that balancing act of finding that sweet spot. I've also seen some evidence too, and we've had some conversations with the teachers who work with the younger kids of that idea of doing kindergarten twice, or doing developmental kindergarten, or doing a pre-K program twice, because you just get to the end and you're like, could we? Yeah. Should we? No one's going to notice if we hold them back a year, because this is a spot where no one's really keeping track of that kind of stuff, which is way easier than trying to do it later on. So it's all a matter of where your family's at, where your kid's at, and being individualized with it. As the Mayo Clinic says, one size fits all doesn't fit.
No, it's true.
Well, cool.
Do you have any tips on, for my going to be a kindergartner, things we should be working on? So what's interesting is the kindergarten teachers, at least at my daughter's school, which my son will be going there as well, have said, please don't teach them how to read before they come to us, because we do strategies differently than other classrooms. My son is obsessed with those.
I have opinions.
A lot more than my daughter does.
I have opinions.
I don't know if you've heard that, but that's...
I have, and we've bumped into it as well with the math curriculum, where there is a definite strategy that the schools are trying to bring in to use at the different grade levels. So like, for example, just to jump in by analogy, with math, we learn the standard algorithm for multiplying. You stack everybody up, you go down, you carry, you're good. That is actually taught very late in the curriculum now, like as in several years later, over when they first introduced the idea of using an area model. And so there's been some gentle pushback when we've had students that have struggled with the area model. So we say, well, here's the standard algorithm. We've gotten some pushback from teachers saying, please don't do that. My personal opinion is I would rather my student be in a situation where they're a little ahead because they have a skill than discourage them to learn at home because I'm worried about the building of the skill. That I will caveat with, there's a reason the schools are adopting these strategies. That's very long term. The area model, for example, is a very good one for later math. So I would just balance it. I think as far as being ready for pre-K, teachers are the experts. So if you're hearing from the school, these are the skills you should work on, that's what I would focus on myself. But I also think if he says, I really would like to read this book with you, okay, let's do it. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to get to the same spot. So I would kind of balance the two as best you can. But remember too, at the end of the day, we want him to be successful. We want him to come out of Harvard and get a great paying job so that he can put you up in a wonderful condo somewhere. Well, that pathway might involve reading a little bit ahead of the teacher schedule.
Well, thank you. This is very helpful. Just again, I am that nerdy bird where I make my daughter read to me 20 minutes every night. She fights me, but you gotta do it.
I like routines.
Yeah. But no, just even looking at the Duolingo, just different things. And again, what's great is my sitter is very good. If I ask her to do something with the kids, she will, but my mom watches them a day and grandma spoils.
That's a different day.
So, there we go. I just didn't know that night I've got to work on it. And I like the assess, the set goals, learning opportunities, and reassess. So this is helpful.
Thank you, I appreciate that. If you have your phone handy as we wrap up, that QR code will take you to a survey about how we did. We love the feedback, so we can use it for future presentations, so I can make adjustments as needed, and everything else. We'll let everybody have a chance to get that. And then, there we go. And then I think that is the end of the presentation. So I thank you for being here in person. I thank everybody who watched it. The Huntington Learning Center in Clarkson, we can be found. We welcome feedback from this presentation, or if you'd like to have us come out and do a presentation with your group, we are happy to. We have a full catalog available. So just give us a call and we will be in touch.